you might have this advanced tab. What you can do is you can actually come down here and if you need it, there's dynamic help for most of this stuff. You can see right now the color box isn't checked, so I'm not going to be editing anything. But these colors right here, and if you come into the illumination, you'll see a lot more options here for you to change, reflections off the surface and things like that. But these colors basically indicate the part of the base color and then the color that you're going to see during a reflection. So we can come in and we can change some of these colors. Let's see here. Let's change it to red, and then we'll come down to this one and change it to purple. And let's change it to something that's more apparent. Alright, so you can change these colors around without really hurting the property of the paint. So, if that original orange didn't really show you what you wanted to see, you can come down in here and play around with these a bit, and it might help you see the way the light's actually hitting. Now you can see as we come across that surface, it does dip a little bit, and that's a product of our geometry here. But I think overall I'm pretty happy with the way the reflections are working, and I think we took just enough time to play with these. You can see the bottom of this body is fairly flat, and then it tapers nicely up into this front section here. The geometry tapers fairly nicely, and you can watch those these reflection lines and how they react when you rotate the model around. And again, like I said, this stuff is really important, because when you don't think about this stuff, it really shows when you start to talk about renders and some of these, the final views. When you start doing this stuff, if you don't think about this stuff during the modeling process, then it's going to be a lot harder to go back and change. The farther down the model, the more curves and the more surfaces depend on that base geometry that we've created, so you really need to be aware of every aspect of the surface you're creating. So right now, this is the main part of the fuselage, and like I said, we're going to do a real general representation of this thing. We're not going to get into all the details, and really, if you go around and you look at pictures, you're not going to find a ton of details, and you'll start to notice that most of the pictures you see of these things are different. I don't know how many different versions of these things out there in use, but I'm sure there are several dozen. So you might get some different geometry. And one thing I want to look at real quick is this one has this camera sensor, and it has antenna domes and things like that on it. We aren't going to add some of these features. We're going to stick with we'll add this pod here on the back, and maybe this one back here, and maybe we'll deal with the propeller and the back end of this thing another time. But we're going to be mainly concerned with the wings and some of these bigger features that really help determine this model. The camera on the bottom, depending on the version of this thing, you might not see a camera, you might see I don't know, a gun or something. But that's just something to be concerned with when you're trying to replicate a model. How much do you want to add into it? How much more realism will some of this stuff add to the model? So just always be thinking about that kind of thing. One thing I've noticed from looking at pictures of these things, the bottom of this, because it's got different equipment that gets mounted to it, the bottom will actually have a flat spot there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come back in here and think about putting some sort of flat spot in this thing later in the model. And the reason I'm saying I'm going to think about it now is because I don't know if I want to do it or not, so I don't really want to introduce it this early in the model. We're not going to have any other geometry in this area, so this part of the model is going to stay fairly the same, but the final product will determine if I want to add anything here or not, if I like the look, or if I want a little bit more more features or something like that in it. So So just be concerned with those kinds of things. You know, even if you're not drawing an airplane, say you're drawing something else, you need to be thinking about all the details during the modeling process, because it'll help you make better decisions as you go along. So if you get to the end of this thing and you say, oh well, I wanted to add this thing in here, it would have been a lot easier to do earlier on in the model. Of course you can roll back to that feature, add it in, and depending on the rest of the model was done, you might not have any problems. But it is very possible with more complicated models that it is going to affect something later on, especially when here we would modify two different surfaces. So what we would probably want to do is maybe knit these together, so we get, you know, continuous edges and trims and things like that happen all at once. So that will certainly have some sort of lasting effect on the rest of the model. All right, enough talking about details. Let's go ahead and let's start adding some more stuff to this thing. I'm going to look at the top blueprint, and I think now might be a good time. Let's go ahead and just add some wings to this thing. I'm going to look at the front blueprint as well. So you can see here from laying out the front blueprint, we have a horizontal line. This was used to scale the wingspan of this thing, and you can obviously tell, you know, if you didn't have that horizontal line in there, you might not know that this wing is actually curved down slightly. Could we draw, you know, a straight wing and have everything be fine? Yeah, I mean that's certainly an option, but you know, the wing does have a slight bit of curve to it, and that's because once this thing's in the air, the weight is going to actually curve these wings up. But for it to be sitting here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just draw on this front plane. I'm going to take a spline, and actually I'm going to go from back here, essentially above the origin. This is on the mid plane, or the right plane. And I'm going to come out to the end here. Now, obviously, this is a fairly straight line, but I want to introduce a little bit of curvature to it. So what we can do back here on this spline, I'm just going to make that horizontal. I'm not going to add any dimensions to these. This part isn't going to be real critical. I'm not too worried about it, but what I want to do is I'm going to exit that sketch and look at this thing from the top. From a top sketch. Now this can be on the top mid plane if you want. The top mid plane is probably not going to intersect where I threw that first sketch, so I'm not too concerned with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw from here to here. Alright, so that's got a little bit of curvature to it. It's not completely straight. And what else do we want to add to this thing? Let's just go with that for now and take a look at this. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use go to the curves menu and use a projected curve. As I mentioned earlier, I use the S key a lot. I keep it in here because this is something I use a lot in complex surface modeling. And what I'll do is you have two options here: sketch on faces, in which case you could project a sketch onto a face, assuming it actually intersected it in the normal direction from your sketch plane. But what I'm going to do is sketch on sketch, and what that is, I'm going to take that first spline that we sketched on the front plane, and then the one we sketched on the top plane, and it's actually projecting those two out into space until they intersect. So I'm going to OK that, and you can see here that you can't actually see it in front of the blueprint, and that's a product of the transparency and stuff I have on these blueprints. I'm just going to hide those. And what I want to show you is I'm going to turn these back on and extrude. Alright, I'm just going to extrude this, I don't know, let's say 2000. Oop, not 200, 2000. That's not even close. Alright, extrude that 5000, and I'm going to take this one and extrude it up 5000. Alright, so this 3D curve, this projected curve that we created, is essentially the intersection between these two circles.